You weren't his wife, but you felt like home. He never said you were the one, but he came to you when his world got too heavy, when his marriage felt too cold, when he needed to feel seen again. And for a moment, you believed that meant something, because he opened up to you. He told you things he couldn't tell her. He looked at you like he hadn't looked at anyone in years. And in those silent moments, between messages, between touches, between emotional confessions, you gave him something sacred. You gave him access to a part of you that didn't ask to be hidden. But when the moment ended, he went back to the life he said he didn't feel part of, back to the house where he said he felt invisible, back to the woman he said didn't understand him, and you were left holding pieces of promises that were never really made. That is what it means to be the second woman. Not because you are second in value, but because your love was kept in the dark, because you were always real in a story that was never allowed to be, because even when he said he loved you inside a silence that made you doubt yourself. And those are wounds no one sees, the invisible ones, the kind that don't leave bruises but live inside your breath, your doubt, your need to be chosen but never quite believing you will be. You didn't just want his affection, you wanted his truth, but his truth was always split, one foot in, one soul out, one night of everything, followed by a week of nothing. And it's not just that he didn't choose you, it's that he made you feel like he wanted to, like he almost did, like if life were different, you would be the one. That is the cruelest kind of wound, to almost be loved, to almost be chosen, to almost be seen fully. And when you finally begin to pull away, when you finally begin to heal, you find yourself grieving something that never really existed. Because how do you mourn a relationship that wasn't real in the eyes of the world, but changed your entire soul? How do you tell someone that the pain you carry isn't from what happened, but from what could have happened if only he were braver, if only he were honest, if only he let his actions match the feelings he said he had? Being the second woman teaches you something no one prepares you for. It teaches you how to hold space for someone else's emptiness without filling your own. It teaches you how to give without being seen, how to love while hiding, how to shrink yourself so his life doesn't break while your heart does. You may have told yourself you were strong, that you could handle it, that one day it would change, but somewhere inside you, the waiting turned into aching, the hoping turned into hollow, the love turned into self-erasure. And now, even when he's gone, he's still in you, in the way you doubt new love, in the way you question your worth, in the way you hesitate to trust someone who says you're enough, because part of you still wonders if being enough means being chosen. And if you weren't chosen, what does that say about your love? But the truth is, your love was never the problem. The problem was giving it to someone who only knew how to take it in secret, who only loved when it was safe for him, but never safe for you, who used your light to warm himself, but never offered you shelter in return. That is the invisible wound. The feeling of being used emotionally while being erased publicly. The guilt of wanting someone who belongs to someone else. The shame of staying in something that keeps hurting. Because the highs are so high, you forget how low the lows really are. And when it ends, you were the one who has to heal in silence. Because no one knew what you meant to him. Because no one saw how much of yourself you gave. Because you weren't the wife. You were the shadow, the secret, the soul he touched and then buried again. But here's what you need to remember. You were never second in spirit. You were never second in depth. You were never second in feeling. You were second in title, but not in truth. Your heart was real. Your love was whole. Your pain is valid, even if the world never saw it. And now, it's time to stop shrinking into roles that do not reflect your worth. To stop calling yourself strong for staying silent in a love that never gave you a voice. To stop hoping he will become the man he only was when no one else was looking. You don't have to be the second woman anymore. You don't have to live in the corner of someone else's story. You don't have to carry the ache of his indecision, because your love is not meant to hide. It is meant to rise. And when you stop asking to be chosen and choose yourself instead, that's when everything begins to shift. That's when you stop bleeding silently and start breathing freely. Maybe you stayed longer than you should have, because part of you believed that loving someone meant waiting, that if you just gave more patience, more softness, more understanding, he would see, he would choose. He would fight for you the way you quietly fought for him. But loving someone who belongs to another life means constantly questioning your own. You start bending yourself into shapes that make room for his silence. You shrink your emotions so they don't become a burden. You wait in the background, not because you're weak, but because you believe in his potential more than he believes in his reality. And that is the slowest kind of heartbreak. The one that doesn't shatter all at once, but dissolves you moment by moment. Every time he said he couldn't, every time he pulled back just when it felt close, every time you had to pretend you didn't want more. You were learning to survive on crumbs of connection while your soul ached for a seat at the table. Even now, if someone were to ask why you stayed, you might not have the words, because love is rarely logical, because emotional bonds don't break with permission, because part of you still believes that what you felt was real, even if the outcome never honored it. But the moment you begin to name what you lost, not just him, but yourself, you start to breathe differently. You begin to feel the places where your boundaries collapsed, where your voice softened too much, where your worth was tied to his attention. And that is where healing begins. In the moment you admit you needed more than he was ever willing to give. In the moment you stop excusing his silence as uncertainty and start recognizing it as a choice. You may never get closure from him, but you can give it to yourself. Not by forgetting, but by forgiving yourself for staying, for believing, for hoping, for loving him from a place he never intended to love you back. Because that love came from the best part of you, the part that still believes in connection, the part that still wants to be chosen fully, not just in shadows. That part deserves to come home. And now, she finally can. If you've ever questioned why you stayed, even when it hurt, the Jung Method can help you understand the emotional patterns behind those choices. You'll find the link in the first comment. You never set out to fall for someone unavailable. You never planned to become the woman who lives in someone else's margins. But love doesn't ask for permission before it enters. It doesn't follow rules. It arrives as a feeling, a recognition, a pull that your mind tries to resist, but your heart keeps answering. At first, it feels innocent, a connection, a conversation that goes a little deeper than usual, a moment where he sees you in a way that startles you awake, and you feel something real, something you haven't felt in a long time, not even with people who were fully yours. That's the part that hurts the most. The fact that something so incomplete felt more alive than anything that was whole. You start to believe the story he tells you, that you're different, that this is rare, that he didn't expect to feel this, and maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he really does feel it, but feelings alone are not commitments. They don't build a bridge unless he's willing to walk all the way across, and he never does. He always stops halfway, so you become the bridge. You make up for the space he won't fill. You hold the emotional weight of two people, while he holds on to the safety of what's already his. You become the woman he comes to for truth, for escape, for reflection, but never for permanence. And the longer it goes on, the more it drains you. The more it makes you question what you're worth if you're only ever held in secret. You tell yourself to be patient, to be understanding. You imagine futures where it works out. You justify the moments of silence because you remember the nights that felt like everything. But deep down, your body knows. It knows you're waiting for someone who never intended to arrive. It knows you're giving yourself to someone who only knows how to take. And still, you stay. Not because you're weak, but because you're wired to hope. Because the feminine is loyal to possibility. Because you see who he could be if only he chose you fully. That hope becomes your cage. It keeps you invested in what isn't real while life passes you by. You say no to other connections, to yourself, to your own growth, because part of you is still holding space for the man who only ever borrowed you, and you don't tell anyone. Because how do you explain that you are grieving a man who was never yours? How do you admit that the deepest heartbreak of your life is something no one even knows about? That's why it hurts so much. Because you're mourning in silence. Because your pain has no name. Because even you have started to believe it doesn't count. But it does count. Every tear you cried behind closed doors. Every time you erased your needs to keep the connection. Every time you answered a message you knew would leave you emptier. That pain is real. And it deserves to be honored. You thought he would eventually choose you. That if you proved your loyalty, your patience, your love, he would see. But love isn't something you should have to prove. And someone who sees your heart and still chooses convenience over connection is not confused. He's already decided. He just doesn't want to say it out loud. So you keep shrinking. You keep bending. You keep waiting. Until one day, something in you breaks. Not with anger, but but with clarity. A quiet knowing that you've given enough, that staying is costing more than you're willing to lose, that your soul is not here to be a mirror for someone who only looks into it when his world gets dark. The moment you realize that is the moment everything begins to shift. You start coming back to yourself. Slowly, painfully, you sit with the emptiness that he used to fill. With stolen attention, you grieve the idea of him, the fantasy, the hope, and it feels like death, but it's not. It's rebirth. It's the part of you that forgot how to choose herself. Finally remembering, you begin to see the truth, that the love you gave was never small, that it deserved to be held in daylight, not kept in the dark, that your softness is not meant to be hidden, that your loyalty is not a test, that your worth is not a question. And when he notices you pulling away, when he senses the shift, he might come back, not because he's ready, but because he feels the power of your absence, because he was never drawn to your pain, he was drawn to your light. And now that you've reclaimed it, he wants to stand in it again. But this time, you see clearly. You see that he never offered a real place to stand, only a shadow, only a corner, only enough to keep you close, but never enough to keep you safe. And so you let go, not with bitterness, but with softness, with grace, with quiet strength, the kind of strength that doesn't need to explain itself, the kind of strength that doesn't need a witness. You no longer chase closure, you no longer wait for apologies, you no longer hope for what he might become, because you finally understand who you are, and who you are is no longer available for fragments. Your love is not meant to be hidden behind locked phones and hushed conversations. It is meant to be seen, to be honored, to be chosen fully. You are not a second option. You are not an escape. You are not the one who waits in the dark hoping to be remembered. You are the light. And now that you've remembered that, nothing and no one can take it from you again. You forgive yourself for not leaving sooner. You forgive yourself for hoping, for believing, for bending. Because now you rise, and this time, you rise for you. And maybe now, as you sit in the quiet space he used to fill, something softer begins to take shape. Not the kind of silence that wounds, but the kind that heals. The kind of silence that is not absence, but presence with yourself. You begin to notice the places within you that are still tender, the parts that still want to be chosen, the echoes of your own voice asking to be heard. You no longer push them away. You sit with them, you breathe with them, and slowly, they begin to trust you again. This is what it means to come back to yourself, to no longer need someone else's words to feel worthy, to no longer need stolen moments to feel seen, to no longer give away pieces of your soul for temporary comfort. You begin to create space in your life for people who choose you openly, who meet you with clarity, who love without hiding. You begin to live from the center of your own truth, not the version of you who waited, not the one who begged in silence, but the version who rose from the ache, with a softness that no longer apologizes for wanting more. And when you meet love again, it will feel different, not because it will be louder, or faster, or more intense, but because it will not require you to disappear to keep it. You will be able to stay, fully, without shame, without fear, without hiding, because now, you know, your heart is not a secret, and your love is not meant to be silent.